The history of slavery is often presented in a sanitized way, framed by two extremes: the image of the docile slave who simply endured their fate, and the hero of a large-scale rebellion. But this view is convenient and false. It either suggests a quiet acceptance of bondage or limits resistance to a few famous, but ultimately failed, uprisings. The truth is, the very foundation of the slave system was a constant, simmering state of war. Historians have documented hundreds of slave conspiracies and uprisings in the United States alone. But beyond those organized revolts, resistance was a daily, multifaceted struggle. You could see it in the slowing of work, the faking of illness, the quiet sabotage of tools, and the fierce preservation of culture and family against all odds. These small acts of resistance were a constant thorn in the side of the slavocracy. But there was another layer of resistance, one that struck fear directly into the hearts of slave owners. This was the individual act of violent revenge, the ultimate rebellion. These weren't grand plans to overthrow the government. They were personal wars waged by individuals pushed past their breaking point. The slave master's greatest fear wasn't just a massive revolt. It was the chilling possibility that the person serving them dinner, tending their children, or working their fields could, at any given moment, decide that enough was enough. These were desperate acts, born from a level of cruelty that's hard to even fathom today. They were the breaking points, and they reveal a side of resistance that history has tried to forget. These acts of vengeance were often swift, brutal, and meticulously planned. They were whispered about on plantations and reported with panicked hysteria in local newspapers. So, let's look at some of the documented cases where enslaved people turned the tables on their tormentors. One of the most well-known examples is the rebellion led by Nat Turner in Southampton County, Virginia. In 1831, Turner, a preacher who believed he was chosen by God, didn't just want to escape. He wanted to tear down the system of slavery by force. The revolt began in the dead of night on August 21st with an act of deeply personal violence. Turner and his followers entered his master's house and killed the entire family as they slept. From there, they moved from plantation to plantation. Over the next 48 hours, Turner's force grew to about 70 men, and they killed between 55 and 65 white people, using clubs, knives, and any weapons they could find. They made no distinction between men, women, or children, a terrifying mirror of the indiscriminate cruelty that defined the slave system itself. While Turner himself confessed to killing only one person, the rebellion he led was the deadliest in U.S. history and sent a shockwave of terror across the South. Then there was the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina, the largest slave revolt in the British Mainland Colonies. Led by an Angolan man named Jemmy, a group of about 20 enslaved people gathered near the Stono River. Their first act was to raid a store for guns and ammunition, killing the two storekeepers. Marching with a banner that read Liberty, and beating drums, their number swelled to nearly 100 as they moved south, burning plantations and killing at least 20 white colonists along the way. The rebellion was eventually crushed by a heavily armed militia, but not before it proved the lethal potential of organized, violent resistance. And we can't forget the 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana, the largest slave rebellion in American history by the number of people who participated. Inspired by the successful Haitian Revolution, a leader named Charles Deslons orchestrated a march toward New Orleans. The revolt began on the plantation of Manuel André, where the rebels attacked André and killed his son. Armed with sugarcane knives, axes, and a few captured guns, their force grew to as many as 500 enslaved people as they marched, burning plantations behind them. Though they only killed 2 white men, the sheer scale of the uprising caused mass panic. The retribution from authorities was swift and barbaric. Militias killed nearly 100 rebels in battle or in summary executions. To instill terror, they put the severed heads of the executed on pikes, lining the road to New Orleans for miles, a grisly testament to the fear these rebels had inspired. These weren't just isolated incidents, stories of individual retribution, like masters being poisoned or found dead in their beds, became the folklore of the slave-owning class, even if the acts themselves were less frequent than the fear they caused. These stories, though often buried, paint a stark picture. For every act of submission, there was a simmering rage that could, and sometimes did, boil over into lethal violence. To understand these acts of violent retribution, you have to try and grasp the psychological landscape of slavery. It was a system designed not just to control the body, but to break the mind. The constant threat of violence, the denial of basic humanity, the separation of families, and the daily degradation, it was all a form of intense psychological torture. From that perspective, violent retaliation wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an act of reclamation, a desperate attempt to reclaim one's own agency and humanity in a world that worked to strip it away. Modern psychology helps us understand the profound effects of generational trauma, and the trauma of slavery, passed down through generations, is a clear example. For many, it led to adaptive survival behaviors. But for some, the only logical response to absolute, unrelenting violence was violence in return. When a person is treated like property, stripped of their identity, and subjected to endless cruelty, their response might eventually mirror the brutality they've endured. These acts happened in a system where masters legally held the power of life and death. Punishments could include whipping, branding, and mutilation, often for the smallest perceived offense. While outright murder of an enslaved person was technically illegal in some places, in practice, a master was rarely held criminally liable for whipping a slave to death. In that context, killing a master could be seen as an act of self-defense, not against an immediate threat, but against the certainty of future torture. It was a preemptive strike against a system designed to slowly kill you, either physically or spiritually. These acts of revenge were also a powerful psychological blow to the institution of slavery. They shattered the myth of the contented slave that owners so desperately wanted to believe in. Every time a master was killed, it sent a message to every other slave owner in the region: you were not safe. This fear was a weapon. It forced masters to live in a state of constant, low-grade anxiety, wondering if the people they enslaved harbored similar thoughts. These acts, while born of desperation, were a powerful assertion of will in the face of absolute power. The history of resistance against slavery isn't a simple story of passive endurance, punctuated by a few big revolts. It's a dark, complex, and often brutal tapestry woven with countless individual acts of defiance. The stories of enslaved people who turned on their masters are deeply disturbing, but they are essential. They force us to confront the true horror of the institution and the extreme measures people will take to fight for their own humanity. For centuries, this part of the narrative has been pushed to the side, maybe because it's too violent or too unsettling for our standard history lessons. But to ignore these stories is to misunderstand the full scope of resistance. It's to deny the agency of those who, facing unimaginable oppression, chose to fight back with the only weapons they had left. These were not monsters. They were human beings pushed to an inhuman breaking point. Their actions, born from desperation, were a testament to the enduring, unbreakable will to be free. If you believe these suppressed histories need to be brought into the light, please share this video. The more people who understand the complete and complex story of resistance, the better we can comprehend our past and its impact on the present. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more explorations of the hidden corners of history. Thanks for watching.